My father didn't die of illness, he was taken by signatures dressed as mercy. I wish I could say this started with a heroic decision, me standing at the edge of some moral cliff and choosing justice. It didn't. It started with a phone call I almost didn't pick up. By then, I was in my new place, still tripping over half-opened boxes, and the last stubborn reminders of a life I used to have with my dad. He'd been gone for months. On paper, it was natural causes. In my chest, it was something else, something heavy that rattled like a bottle of pills in a dark drawer. The number on my screen was unfamiliar. I actually watched it ring out once, then on the second try answered. Is this his daughter? The voice was a woman's. Soft. Tired. She introduced herself. Marisol Torres, an ICU nurse from the hospital where my father died. Her voice kept catching, like she was trying to hold herself together with nothing but breath. I can't keep quiet about what happened to him, she said. That sentence pinned me to the moment. All the air seemed to slip out of the room. I set down the picture frame in my hand, my father smiling beside a grill on a summer Sunday, and pressed the phone to my ear like it might anchor me to the floor. I can't say everything on the phone, Marisol went on. Please. Meet me. Neutral grounds. Tomorrow morning. Bring no one. We agreed on a time. When I hung up, the apartment was too quiet for a long while. Every sound from the street felt like a false alarm. I didn't sleep. I lay awake, replaying his final days, the way he'd started to look like someone I barely recognized, hollowed out by pain, and by something I didn't have a name for yet. I had been kept away from too many of those moments. For his peace, his wife, Celine, had said. It was always about peace, by her definition. She'd banned me from the funeral, had me removed from the obituary like I was an inconvenience rather than his daughter. Even writing those words makes my jaw clench. But that's getting ahead of the story. Morning found me at the cafe before opening, hands wrapped around a cup I didn't drink. Marisol came in with a manila folder held tight to her chest. She looked like she hadn't slept either. She slid the folder across the table with this tiny, decisive nod, as if, once it touched my fingers, there would be no turning back. Dosage logs, she said. Your dad's last week. Inside. Copies of medication, charts, signatures, timestamps, notes. The dosages jumped and jumped again. Each line a quiet escalation. Morphine levels tripled in 3 days. The notes didn't match the orders his attending physicians had written, but every authorization, every change had the same counter-signature. Celine, as medical proxy. My throat burned. I remember tracing the loops of her signature with one finger. The way you do when you're trying to convince yourself what you're seeing is real. I raised concerns, Marisol said. I was reassigned. I tried again. I was shut down. She swallowed. And it wasn't just your father. There were others. Elderly patients with Celine listed as proxy. Same pattern. I think something in me hardened then. Not anger. Anger had been simmering for months, but a kind of focus I've only felt a few times in my life. I had been moving through grief like a person wading through deep water. Slow, reluctant, heavy. But this was different. This was like a current grabbed me and said, swim. I thanked her. I promised I would help with whatever came next. When I stepped back into the daylight, a simple truth had formed so clearly I could barely breathe around it. My father hadn't just died, he had been taken. If you've ever been the one everyone tries to handle, you'll understand the strangeness of those first steps. People who had talked over me for months started talking to me. I called Rowan, the attorney who'd helped me put guardrails around my father's estate when Celine began treating his assets like party favors. He'd seen me in every mood from quiet, almost polite fury to the kind where the voice drops an octave and you start quoting the trust instrument line by line. Still, I don't think he'd ever heard me like that morning. Clipped sentences, facts only, no drifting. Come in, he said. Bring the documents, we'll make copies. Rowan's office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind with stairwells that smell like paper and dust, and overheard conversations. I left the folder on his desk and watched him sort through the logs. He didn't interrupt. He started marking pages, cross-referencing dates with the hospital's care plans, outlining a path forward. This is not just a malpractice suit, he said at last. This smells like a pattern. We'll need subpoenas for other charts where she's listed as proxy. We'll need to protect the nurse you said her name is Marisol, under whistleblower statutes. And we'll need to get the DA's office to care about this as potential criminal conduct. He glanced at me. Do you have the stamina for that? I stared at the signature again. Celine. And I remembered the first time I realized she thought trust meant control. She had wanted to use my father's trust to pay for landscaping perfectly reasonable, on its face, except she would only use her preferred vendor, a bloated budget service that happened to be owned by a friend. I had said no, politely at first. When no didn't hold, I said it again, With documentation. That was the day she dropped the mask in front of me. Accused me of trying to ruin her life. The barbs didn't matter. The trust was clear. She sold the house within 6 months because she couldn't stand that my signature mine still meant something. I used my share to buy this apartment. Every time I turn the key, I can hear my father say, "Good, you didn't let her win." So when Rowan asked about stamina, I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said. "Tell me what to do." Here's the part where the story should jump to a dramatic scene, a raid, a confession, something cinematic. Reality doesn't move like that. Reality is phone calls. Forms, long afternoons with highlighters and legal pads, and 1,000 small choices to keep going. Rowan filed. The hospital stonewalled. He filed again. I spent evenings at my kitchen table with sticky notes and a scanner, building a timeline so thorough, it felt like a second job. Dosage changes, visitor logs, shift schedules, billing entries. When it got too quiet, I'd call Ara, my neighbor. She didn't ask for details. She'd just knock on my door with tea and a look that said, "If you need me to sit here and breathe with you, I will." I wish I could say it was just grit and procedure. It wasn't. There were messy, human moments like the day I opened the last box from my dad's storage unit. It was mostly junk, old tax returns, appliance manuals, that weird universal remote he never figured out. At the bottom, a shoebox full of letters. Some addressed to me but never mailed. One dated a month before he died. In his handwriting, shaky but still decidedly his. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you from her. I know she's keeping you away. And I'm not strong enough to stop it. I love you. I should have done more." I sat on the floor and cried so hard the ink blurred. It's a strange thing, isn't it? To feel an apology from the person who should never have had to ask forgiveness. I don't blame him. Not even an ounce. That's not how this works. I blame the person who turned caring into control, and control into something much darker. The first real crack in the wall came from an unexpected direction. Alara, a cousin who had drifted out of the family orbit to keep her sanity intact. She showed up at my door with a laptop and a flash drive and said, "I think you need to see this." Photos from the day of the funeral reception, the one I wasn't allowed to attend. In the parking lot, near the dumpsters, Celine meeting with Dr. Adrian Kessler, the attending doctor who'd overridden Marisol's concerns. In one frame he was red-faced, gesturing like someone who couldn't control his story anymore. In another, she looked afraid. Or pretending to be. With Celine, it was always hard to tell. We added the timestamps to the timeline. Rowan drafted new requests. I called Marisol to check on her. She had been suspended pending internal review for alleged violations of patient confidentiality. Her voice was small with worry. 3 kids. 1 paycheck. I told her we would cover her lost wages and legal fees. It wasn't heroism, it was a simple matter of fairness. If the truth costs you your job, the least the truth can do is help pay your rent. Then, one afternoon, my phone lit up with Dorian's name. He was Celine's son. We weren't close, he'd never had much use for me, so the fact that he called at all told me something had shifted. He sounded sober, careful, and scared. "She's moving money," he said. "All week, different accounts. She keeps saying Adrian's plan is falling apart and we need to cover tracks." He paused. I think she did something. Really bad. His would once and out now. First when to, wants of the Klong tank. I told him to write everything down, dates, sums, names, the exact words he could remember. Then I called Rowan again. That's how it was for a while. This web tightening. Small strands connecting. Each strand too thin to mean anything on its own. But together, a net. And then came the encounter I wish I could erase. I ran into Celine at the grocery store near my new place. I was loading a bag into my trunk when her voice slid up behind me. My body went cold so fast I felt dizzy. She stood between cars, thinner than I remembered, older, the same expensive perfume once just a scent, now a trigger. "You have no idea what you're destroying," she said in a voice that wasn't quite hers. I didn't think. I just hit record on my phone and let it hang at my side. She talked and talked. "My father would have died anyway," she said. This way it meant something, whatever that means when your something is a bank account and a clean narrative. Her hands shook. Her eyes kept darting, scanning for a witness or a salvation that wasn't coming. I told her to step back. She grabbed my arm hard enough to scratch. Another shopper approached, one of those small grace notes you don't realize is part of a larger composition until later, and asked if everything was okay. Celine released me and tried to paste on a smile. She walked away fast, but not before turning and saying I would regret all of this. I sat in my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, and didn't drive. Not for several minutes. Then I called Rowan. We played the audio for a detective who listened to it 3 times and finally said, she essentially confessed. Papers were set in motion. That night, I washed the scratches and tried to sleep. Instead, I wrote down every word she'd said, every detail I could pull out of the moment. Not because I'm some perfect recorder of truth, but because I know memory is a fickle witness. Facts on paper keep it honest. Some days after that, the pattern emerged sharp enough that you couldn't pretend not to see it. The medical board cracked open Dr. Kessler's other cases. The hospital's risk team began doing that lawyerly shuffle where they say, no admission of wrongdoing, while simultaneously asking how big a check would make the problem go away. And other families began stepping forward. They tell you grief is isolating. It is. But there's also a strange relief when you discover you were never alone when other people start saying the words you've been whispering to your ceiling in the dark. I found myself one Tuesday at a community center, sitting in a circle of folding chairs with strangers who weren't strangers anymore. A woman named Miriam cried while describing how a nurse had kept her from seeing her mother in her final days. A man named Gareth unfolded an obituary clipped from a newspaper. His name had been removed just like mine. I brought coffee and pastries, because if we were going to share the worst parts of our lives, we might as well have something warm to hold. We compared notes. We saw the same shapes reappear. An attentive wife who placed herself between patient and family. An attending physician who complied. Medication adjustments that didn't match cases. Beneficiaries who were new, improbable, and always stood to gain. Every story is different. The pattern was the same. One night late enough that the city felt like it was holding its breath, I went digging through a storage bin I'd almost given up on. At the bottom was something I didn't know existed. My father's journal from those last months. His handwriting sloped and stiffened as the weeks passed. He wrote about feeling fuzzy after visits, wondering why he felt worse after she helped with pills. The kind of doubt you only write when you're alone, and you don't want to scare the person you love. I closed the journal and felt the orbit of my life shift one more time. People sometimes think justice comes in one blazing moment. It doesn't. It comes in these small stacking choices. Answer the strange number. Show up at the cafe. Bring the folder to the lawyer. Tell the truth. Write it down. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. And eventually, after you've moved steadily through enough of those choices, you can feel it gathering. The investigation isn't just a collection of papers anymore. It's a story the system is finally willing to hear. When I locked my door that night, I remembered the apartment key that used to turn in my father's old house, the one Celine sold when she realized she couldn't move a wall without my approval. I thought of the trust document she resented, and the garden my father had wanted to replant with yellow roses. I thought of a promise I'd made, alone with a stone marker in a quiet cemetery. I will get you justice. I'm telling this like a story because that's how it lives in me, scene by scene, breath by breath. But don't mistake the style for the substance. The substance is simple. A daughter. A pattern. A decision. A nurse who told the truth. A lawyer who didn't blink. A mother of 3 who risked her job because she couldn't live with what she knew. This is how it began. The first thing you learn when you start pulling a thread like this is that paper has teeth. Every document that looks harmless at a glance can bite when you read what's actually on the lines, not just between them. And by paper, I don't just mean paper. I mean the hospital's electronic charts, the PDFs with page numbers that mysteriously skip, the emails that read like they were written on the run, the billing statements with codes you have to Google twice to understand. It's all paper, and it all cuts. Rowan called it building the spine. He spread the manila folders out on his conference table like vertebrae, dosage logs, proxy authorizations, visitor restrictions, attending orders, billing divided by ICD codes, risk MGMT notes, security footage requests, phone records. Each section had tabs, and each tab had subtabs, and each subtab had sticky notes with my handwriting angled like I was leaning into the truth with my whole body. We were still waiting on subpoenas to come back. But you don't wait idle. You arrange what you have so that when the missing bones arrive, there's a skeleton ready to receive them. We started with the proxy authorizations, because those were the hinge. Without Celine's status as medical proxy, the rest of it would be difficult. Maybe impossible. I looked at the form and tried to imagine how she'd sold it to my father. He trusted easily, or rather, he trusted deliberately. He never confused kindness with gullibility. But pain can do strange things to judgment. A proxy form signed in an intake room after a night of not sleeping is not the same as a proxy discussed calmly weeks earlier. I tried not to judge the version of him who signed. I tried to be the daughter who would understand that he was tired. Still, there it was. His signature, then hers. Dates. A checkmark beside the line that said, "Proxy may make end-of-life decisions consistent with patient's wishes." Wishes. The slipperiest word in medicine. The most abused. Do we challenge the proxy itself? I asked. Rowan chewed on the end of his glasses. Yes and no. We argue it was obtained under duress and used beyond its scope. But even if the proxy stands, the orders must meet the standard of care. If the doctor rode the line or crossed it because the proxy said to, that's not a shield. That's a map to criminal liability. 1. I exhaled through my nose, steadying. Okay. He slid a second document toward me. And this is the visitor's restriction, signed by the attending, countersigned by the proxy. To minimize patient agitation, visits restricted to spouse only. He tapped a note. Nurse concern logged about change in affect post-visit. Attending overruled concern. I stared at the words until they stopped swimming. To minimize agitation. I was the agitation. Or that's how they framed it. Put a medical word on a daughter, and suddenly she's a symptom to be managed, instead of a person with eyes and history and a name that sounds like her father's, when you say it soft. Next steps? I asked. 2 tracks, he said, civil and criminal. Civil buys us discovery, power, leverage, and money for the families, including you. Criminal buys us accountability that can't be written off as no admission of wrongdoing. We'll need a prosecutor with a spine and a medical examiner who hasn't had their empathy surgically removed. He said it flat but kind. He'd seen this before, different names, different hospitals, same choreography. That's the thing people misunderstand about one-off tragedies. They're almost never one-off. They're dress rehearsals. Back at my apartment, the whiteboard above my desk became a war map. Colored markers for different strands. Blue for medical orders. Green for money flows. Red for incidents, threats, or anything that smelled like obstruction. Black for dates, because time is the only neutral party if you treat it right. I drew lines like constellations, dots like stars. In the margin, I wrote verbs in a column called signed, ordered, overrode, blocked, increased, cached, emailed, met. Because verbs are the part of a sentence that go to court. I called Marisol every other day. Not to pry she'd tell me what she could tell when she could tell it. Mostly to keep her from floating off into the kind of fear that makes you do something rash like accept a settlement that is really a hush. She'd put the phone on speaker while she packed lunches and I'd talk to her kids about spelling tests and soccer practice and how calling a timeout when you're overwhelmed is a skill, not a failure. I don't know who I was trying to reassure, more them or me. Then came the email from a hospital risk manager, with a name like a password. First initial, middle initial, last name. The tone was gracious to the point of oily. They'd learned I had concerns, and they welcomed the chance to meet in person to discuss pathways to resolution for all parties. Translation: come alone and let us make this your private grief instead of our public problem. Rowan replied, copying me and a BCC to a friend of his at the Attorney General's office. His reply was 6 sentences long and said nothing other than, future communications to counsel. It was the kindest no I'd ever seen. We did agree to one thing. To accept digital copies of records in lieu of printed sets, as long as they arrived through a secure channel and included metadata. That's another thing you learn. It's not what's in the record. It's when the record says it became what it is. Edits leave fingerprints. Metadata is the ink that doesn't wash off. Rowan's paralegal, Nayla, taught me how to read the export trails. Each change to an order left a timestamp, a user ID, a workstation location. When I lined those up with shift schedules, the shape got ugly. The largest morphine jumps happened on the nights when Kessler was on. The counter signatures landed within minutes of the dosage bumps. Celine's login appeared in the proxy notes shortly before or after the attending changes. Sometimes she was in the room. Sometimes she wasn't. Either way, her digital shadow was. Is this enough? I asked. It's enough to ask better questions under oath, Rowan said. And enough to make a prosecutor wonder how many families are going to fill their courtroom if this goes forward. I didn't smile. Not yet. Too early for celebration. Too late for innocence. When the first subpoena return from the bank arrived, we saw the part of the net I had only guessed at. Transfers out of a joint account into a trust I'd never heard of. The Larkspur Family Trust with Celine as trustee and 3 beneficiaries. Celine, her son Dorian, and a name I didn't recognize, Havenline Wellness Initiative. Nonprofit. New, the kind of new that still smells like printer toner. I ran the name, and the filings fell out like they were eager to be found. A post office box. A website that looked like it was built in an afternoon. Board members whose headshots were the kind of stock images you find under confident professional diverse team. The mission statement was a salad of words. Integrative, compassion-based, end-of-life journeying. They had one donor of record so far, Kessler Medical Consulting LLC. The loop was getting more elegant and, therefore, more obvious. What's the angle? I asked Rowan. Why the nonprofit? He didn't look up from the papers. Because money that moves through a charity gets blessed by language. And because a board can vote stipends to program partners. And because a charity lets you speak about suffering in a voice that sounds holy enough to launder what you've done. I said nothing for a long while. Then, I hate how believable that is. He nodded. It's believable because we all want someone to explain pain like it has a purpose. People who prey on that don't look like villains, they look like guides. When I walked home that night, the city felt tilted. Like I was stepping sideways down a hill. Lanterns hung in the windows of a restaurant near my building. And a couple at the corner was arguing quietly about something that mattered only to them. Life was everywhere, in tiny, unremarkable pieces. I let that soothe me. If you only stare at the dark shape of a pattern, you start to think the world is just patterns. It isn't. Sometimes it's just a person picking up oranges, squeezing until they find the one that yields. The assistant district attorney we landed with was a woman named Seraphine Kwan. She wore her hair in a bun that said, "I've got 5 more meetings today and no time for nonsense." She didn't waste charm. She went straight to, "Show me the best 5 documents for a jury." Rowan slid them over: the dosage escalation sheet, the visitor restriction order, the metadata logs, the bank transfer ledger, and the proxy form paired with my father's journal entry about feeling fuzzy after visits. Seraphine read like a litigator and a person. When she put the last page down, she asked, "If we indict, you know this is going to get ugly. Are you prepared for ugly?" "Yes," I said. Then, because I tell the truth when it counts. "I'm scared of it." "But yes." Her mouth did that not quite smile people do when they like the answer even if they wish they didn't have to ask. "We'll start with a grand jury," she said. "You won't have to testify at that stage, but we'll need your cooperation on locating other families and confirming that our timeline is airtight." Grand jury, airtight. The words landed like tools on a table. Heavy, useful, not to be played with. Marisol, for her part, was clinging to her job by a thread. Her union rep had finally shown up to a meeting, which meant the hospital recognized there was more at stake than one nurse with attitude. She texted me a photo of a sticky note she'd stuck to her mirror: "Tell the truth. Then rest." I sent back a photo of my whiteboard with the word rest added under my verb column. Right after keep going, the other families started to find us faster. That's the thing about a pattern. Once you name it out loud, people start measuring their lives against it. You could hear the realization in their voices. The little gasp on the phone when a stranger's story opens your own like a locked room. We built a list. Not because we were assembling an army, though sometimes it felt like that, but because the DA would need names to show scope. 2 cases are tragedy. 8 cases are scandal. 15 cases are policy. We were at 11 confirmed when the 12th called. Inez, from a number with an out-of-state area code. She worked night shift at a care home across town. She'd seen Celine visit a resident there, a man with a mild cognitive impairment who'd been doing fine. Then he wasn't fine. Then he was gone. Inez had kept a notebook because she didn't trust the electronic system. And in that notebook were dates and times of visits, med changes, and who had keys to the cabinet where the just-in-case opioids were stored. Inez brought the notebook to Rowan's office and put it on the table like an offering. "You shouldn't have to be the system," I said to her, later, as we stood outside waiting for rides. She shrugged. "Somebody has to keep count when counting matters." I wrote that down the minute she left. Somebody has to keep count when counting matters. It's the kind of sentence that buoys you when your stomach drops out from under you in a meeting because someone says something like, "Our exposure here is manageable." And you remember exposure is a word they use for lives. It didn't take long for Celine to escalate. She filed for a temporary restraining order to keep me from interfering in the peaceful administration of the decedent's wishes and estate. The judge saw through it in 10 minutes. Celine showed up in a cream suit with a silk scarf and cried without tears. The judge leaned on the bench and said, "Ma'am, I am not here to referee family grief. I am here to enforce the law. I will not issue a gag order on a daughter asking questions about her father's death." We walked out past her and Dorian. His face was set, jaw tight, like he was clenching around something. When our eyes met, he didn't look away this time. Later that afternoon, he sent me a photo of a scrap of paper he'd found in his mother's desk, a list of names with check marks. Next to my father's name, final. Next to 2 others, delayed. Next to one, push Kessler. He texted me 4 words. "I don't want this." I wrote back, "Then help stop it." He did. He gave a statement to the DA about the non-profit, the transfers, and a conversation he'd overheard about the problem with nurses who think they're heroes. He looked gray when he finished. I said thank you and meant it. I also told him to get a lawyer of his own, because love doesn't protect you in court, and guilt isn't a plan. Grand jury day felt like waking up inside a drum. The courthouse hallway echoed with heels and whispers and the squeak of a food cart. Seraphine disappeared behind a door with a frosted window. Rowan and I sat on a bench and didn't speak. Silence is its own language in places like that. It says, "We'll know what we know when we know it." When she came back out, her shoulders looked the same as when she'd gone in, which I took as a good sign. "They're taking it seriously," she said. "We'll hear back soon." Soon in her world meant anything from hours to weeks. She squeezed my shoulder, not a promise, just an anchor, and moved on to whatever came next behind another door. I walked out into daylight and realized I'd been holding my breath for months. I let some of it go. Not all. Not yet. On my way home, I stopped at the cemetery. It's a habit I don't broadcast because people want you to be tidy in your grief, and nothing about this is tidy. I sat on the low stone edge and talked out loud like I was telling him a story he already knew the ending to. I told him about the grand jury, about Inez's notebook, about Marisol's sticky note, about the judge who saw through a scarf in a performance, about Dorian, whose conscience finally outshouted his fear, about the Larkspur Trust and the Haven Line charity and the doctor who used comfort as a weaponized word. I told him about the oranges in the store window, and the lanterns, and the way the city keeps offering small proofs that most people are good most of the time. I told him I missed him. That I was angry and tired and stubborn and not done. When I got home, there was an envelope under my door with no return address. Inside were printed screenshots of a group chat. Kessler, Celine, and 2 others I didn't recognize. The messages read like a play where every actor thinks they're the lead. "Do it tonight. She's asking questions I don't like. Nurse reassigned. We need to keep it consistent." The last message was the one that made my skin crawl. "Remember, pain doesn't testify." I scanned them and sent them to Rowan and Seraphine. Then I sat at my kitchen table and put my head in my hands for a full minute. Because there are sentences that make the world tilt, and you have to hold on to the table while it writes itself again. When I lifted my head, I added a new verb to my whiteboard. Indict. Here's what I want you to understand. If you're watching this on a screen and thinking about your own father or mother, or someone you love who once looked past you and said, "It'll be okay," even when you both knew it wasn't. Justice isn't a straight line. It's a path you walk with other people's hands in yours. Sometimes your grip slips. Sometimes theirs does. You adjust. You shift. You keep walking. There were mistakes. I sent an email too soon and tipped someone off. I misread a code and spent a day chasing a phantom diagnosis. I rehearsed what I would say to Celine if I saw her again, then remembered I didn't owe her words, only boundaries, and, if it came to it, testimony. I used to be the person who apologized when someone else bumped into me. I am not that person anymore. A week after the envelope arrived, Seraphine called. Her voice was calm, the way people sound when they've practiced not sounding excited. "We have indictments," she said, "on Kessler. Second-degree manslaughter. Conspiracy. Fraud. On Celine. Conspiracy. Fraud. Witness intimidation. There may be more counts as other families finalize statements, but this gets us in the door." I didn't cry. I thought I would. Instead, I felt a warmth in my chest like someone had turned up a light in a room I'd convinced myself was stuck at dusk. "What happens now?" I asked. "Arraignment," she said. "Bail hearings. Discovery. And then we get to the part where the public hears the story, not as rumor, but as evidence." Evidence. My favorite word. The one that never rolls its eyes. Never gaslights. Never says you're making too big a deal of it. Evidence just lays there, solid and patient, and says, "I'll be here when you're ready." I texted Marisol, "We're moving." She sent back 3 heart emojis and a photo of her kids holding a sign that said, "Thank you for telling." I don't know how the sign happened so fast. But that's the thing about communities once they start assembling. They show up with construction paper and markers, and write the truth in letters big enough to see across a room. That night, I lit a candle. Not because I'm trying to manufacture meaning where there isn't any, but because ritual is one way to tell your nervous system that time is passing in the right direction. I opened my father's journal and read a page where he wrote about yellow roses again, and how he wanted to plant them because they were his mother's favorite, and because he liked flowers that have the courage to be bright. I closed the book and told him I would plant them in the spring. Then I set my alarm. Because the morning would come, and with it more documents and calls and choices. And I wanted to meet it awake. You don't win by out-sprinting the dark. You win by outlasting it. And so we moved forward toward courtrooms and cameras and questions asked into microphones. Toward a doctor who would learn what it feels like to have someone else write your chart. Toward a woman who weaponized proximity and would have to sit still while strangers measured the harm. Toward families who would find out they weren't alone. We moved forward because the only way out was through. The day of the arraignment started gray. The kind of sky that presses low and makes you feel like you're walking under a ceiling. I took it as a sign, not an omen, just a reminder that some days don't offer light for free. You have to bring your own. Rowan met me on the courthouse steps with his usual inventory. A leather folio, 2 pens, and an expression set to steady. He does steady like a musician does tempo so consistently you stop noticing until someone else rushes and you feel the difference. Inside, the courtroom had that polished wood and whisper vibe that makes everyone behave like they're in the presence of something larger than themselves. Even when the day's business is painfully human. The pews creaked. A bailiff told a man to remove his hat. On the far side, a row of reporters secured their notebooks like talismans. A few families I'd gotten to know squeezed my hands as we took our seats. We didn't say much. There's a point where words become air bubbles. You need ballast. Kessler came in first with his lawyer, a man shaped like a filing cabinet. Kessler looked smaller out of the white coat and the title. It's a thing you learn. Some people are mostly costume. Strip the uniform and the permissions, and you're left with someone who blinks too much and adjusts his cuffs like they'll save him. The clerk read the charges. Second-degree manslaughter. Conspiracy. Fraud. Words you think you only encounter in movies until you're hearing them said out loud to the person whose signature sits in your father's chart. How do you plead? The judge asked. Not guilty. The lawyer answered for him. Of course he did. Bail arguments came next. Seraphine's voice didn't waver. She walked through risk factors like a list she'd rehearsed but wasn't bored by. Access to money, relationships with potential witnesses, a recent attempt to get a nurse reassigned after she raised concerns. The defense offered up community ties and a lifetime of service. Service. I felt my jaw flex. Service that leaves bodies is not service. It's branding. The judge set bail high, with conditions. Surrender passport. No contact with any named witnesses. No practice of medicine pending case. The last condition landed like a door closing. Celine's arraignment felt different. She arrived in understatement cream blouse, neat slacks, hair in that careful chignon she wears when she wants to look like a reasonable person under siege by unreasonable events. She scanned the room and paused when her eyes found me. If looks could file motions, her charges, conspiracy, fraud, witness intimidation sounded clinical in the clerk's reading. But I heard them as a ledger of choices. Conspired. The plans in parking lots and kitchen whispers. Defrauded. The money moved around as if it were hers to direct. Intimidated. The hand on my arm. The messages sent through other people like heat through a vent. Not guilty, her attorney said. And the words felt like a script printed in a typeface I can't unsee anymore. Denial as default. Bail was a chess game. Her lawyer argued she was no threat, and that family disputes had been unfairly criminalized. Seraphine didn't take the bait. She presented a thin stack of texts and a voicemail transcript where Celine had told a cousin to remind a nurse about her mortgage situation. The judge's face did that micro frown reserved for people who confuse pressure with persuasion. Bail was set with similar conditions. No contact, no managing of funds in any trust or nonprofit pending case. When the judge said, Havenline, Celine blinked like someone had just said her secret name out loud. After, in the hallway, cameras bloomed like hydrangeas, microphones arced. A reporter asked me what I hoped for. There are 100 ways to answer that: badly cinematic, snarky, or something heroic that curdles later. I gave the truth as simply as I could. I hope for a fair trial, and for other families to know they're not alone. Evidence will tell the story. We're just here to make sure it's heard. They wanted follow-ups. Soundbite fishing. I gave them the same line twice because consistency is boring to the wrong people and comforting to the right ones. Back upstairs, Seraphine shepherded us into a conference room and laid out the calendar with the efficiency of someone who keeps 3 clocks in her head. Motions in 6 weeks, a status conference after discovery milestones, and a tentative trial window 3 months out, assuming the defense didn't file something designed to burn time like dry leaves. They will file everything, she said, dry as toast. We will answer what matters. You will not read their filings at 2 a.m. on your couch, and let them live in your nervous system. That is my very kind order. I smiled despite myself. Yes, ma'am. This is not mater was record for part of me. Motions are the legal system's dialect for arguments about arguments. The defense led with a motion to suppress the parking lot photos and the anonymous screenshots of that group chat. They wanted to exclude anything they could call prejudicial or unreliable. Translation: anything that reminded a jury of the pattern. Rowan and Seraphine built walls around the evidence with case law and common sense. The photos were time-stamped. The photographer could testify. And contrary to what TV suggests, privacy in a public parking lot is not a thing. As for the screenshots, they came authenticated by subscriber records we'd subpoenaed from the messaging platform. Plus the IP addresses matched locations we could place Celine and Kessler at in that period. Fingerprints. Again, before the hearing, Seraphine ran a mock argument in her office. She took the defense's position and forced Rowan to answer fast, because that's how it happens when stakes are high. Your pulse outruns your mouth if you're not practiced. I watched them go 2 rounds and learned more in 20 minutes than in a month of law blogs. You're good at this, I said when we left. I'm good at repetition, she corrected. I'm just stubborn enough to rehearse my courage. And the will to open design, that line stuck. I wrote it on my whiteboard. Rehearse your courage. Discovery is where the bones really start to calcify. We got audit logs from the hospital's charting system that showed access patterns: who opened my father's file when, from which workstation, for how long. We got shift rosters and visitor sign-ins. We got billing exports that mapped opioid dispenses and comfort care packages to dates and rooms. You don't think of grief as a spreadsheet until someone hands you one and it shows your father's last week in columns that add up to a story. In return, we gave over what we had. The journal pages, with personal bits redacted, the audio from the grocery store encounter, Dorian's statement, and the drive with the screenshots, plus a chain of custody sheet that would make a lab proud. The defense flinched hardest at the journal. They filed a motion in limine to exclude it as inflammatory hearsay. I bristled. Seraphine put a hand on the table, anchoring the moment. We'll fight it, she said, under state of mind exceptions. It's not a verdict, it's context. Jurors are allowed context. And after Deo, at night, when the documents blurred, I did small things with my hands. Cleaned the stovetop, rolled silverware in napkins for no reason. Alphabetized the spices. I actually only used 3 of. I planted 2 yellow rose bushes on my windowsill in pots that were too small but determined. It felt like making a promise out loud. Then came the depositions, the slow dance where lawyers talk like they're not fighting, and witnesses answer like every syllable might step on a tripwire. Marisol went first. She wore a blazer that didn't hide that she's a mother who has to get to pick up later. She told the truth the way she'd written it on the sticky note, plainly. Then she breathed. The defense tried to paint her as disgruntled and agenda-driven. Seraphine objected to the form of questions like she was swatting gnats. In the breaks, I brought Marisol water and a granola bar, and thanked her without turning it into a speech that would make her cry off her mascara. Kessler's deposition was controlled, that's the word. He slid around direct answers with the ease of someone who's trained residents to ask better questions or be ignored. He said clinical judgment a lot, like saying it enough would conjure a standard of care out of thin air. He used passive voice the way some people use breath mints. The dosage was increased. The patient was experiencing, as if actions happen by themselves when you put on a coat and call it doctoring. Rowan stayed patient, then laced in metadata like a filament. At 2:14 a.m., you increased the morphine to X. At 2:20 a.m., the proxy note was updated. At 2:23, the nurse flagged a concern. At 2:29, you overwrote it. Is that accurate? Without the room to philosophize, his answers shrank. Yes. Correct. That appears to be so. A record becomes its own witness if you read it slowly enough. Celine's depot was theater. Faux surprise, offended pauses, hand to chest at the idea that someone would question her intentions. Intentions are the costume people wear when their actions won't pass dress code. Rowan didn't take the bait. He walked her through dates, bank transfers, the nonprofit's bylaws, and a board vote where stipends were approved the same week 2 comfort care partners signed contracts. Her lawyer objected so many times I started imagining a little counter pinging each one like a carnival game. At one point, when asked if she remembered the grocery store encounter, she said, tone saintly, I tried to offer reconciliation. She escalated. I stared at the table to keep my face from telling the whole story. Rowan slid a transcript across. Is this your voice on this recording? He asked. She studied it like maybe the answer would change if the paper bent enough. It sounds like me, she said finally. My pen left a dot of ink on my notepad from pressing too hard. After, in the elevator, I felt that old dizziness, adrenaline without anywhere to run. Rowan pressed the button for the lobby and said, You did well. I laughed, sharp. I didn't do anything. He shook his head. You did the important thing. You didn't interrupt the truth trying to defend itself. That's harder than talking. This was one of a Bart of Prest. I put that line on the board too. Don't interrupt the truth while it's doing its job. Motions day arrived like exam day in school. The air in the courthouse hummed with the anxiety of people who didn't study enough, and people who studied too much. The judge took the bench and did the judicial equivalent of cracking knuckles. Let's move briskly, counsel. The defense argued to exclude the photos. The judge denied. They tried again with the screenshots. The judge asked 3 questions about authentication and chain of custody, then said, admissible. Subject to foundation at trial. They pressed to exclude the journal. He reserved judgment, which is judge code for I'll think about it and make you sweat. He set deadlines like stepping stones across a creek. Outside, the microphones found Seraphine first. She said, we respect the process, and we look forward to presenting the evidence. Reporters turned to me. I stuck to my line. Evidence will tell the story. I am a woman of verbs now, not adjectives. That evening, Era stopped by with takeout and the gift of being in a room without asking me to narrate it. We ate on the couch and watched a show where minor conflicts resolve in 22 minutes because someone remembers to be kind. At one point she put her head on my shoulder and said, you're doing it. I didn't ask what it was, I just let myself believe her. 2 weeks later, the judge issued a written order admitting the journal under the state of mind exception. I read it twice, then read it aloud, then read it into the quiet of my apartment like a prayer for people who need proofs with their hope. The defense pivoted. Of course they did. A plea offer landed in Seraphine's inbox like a bird that doesn't know it has flown into the wrong house. Kessler would plead to a lesser charge with no jail time. Celine would accept probation and a fine in exchange for a global resolution with civil waivers attached. Translation. Let us wrap this up in soft language and call it closure. Seraphine called me before she replied. This is your decision as much as mine, she said. I can recommend. I won't dictate. What would you recommend if it were your father? I asked. She didn't hesitate. No. Then no, I said. Not because I wanted a spectacle. Not because I wanted them to suffer. Because no was the only sentence that told the truth about what happened. She wrote back. Declined. I sat in my kitchen and listened to the word echo in the ceramic bowl of the room. The press grew teeth the way boredom grows when there's blood in the water. They called Marisol at home. They parked outside Celine's building. They tried to make the other families fight each other with quoted half sentences. I set up a group chat and we agreed on 3 rules. 1. No solo interviews. If someone wants to talk, we talk together. 2. No social media beyond logistics. 3. When in doubt, say, evidence will tell the story. It became a refrain, almost musical, and there was relief in having one sentence to carry when your arms get tired. The nonprofit Havenline attempted a rebrand. New name, new logo, new mission language that sounded like it had been put through a blender labeled, palatable. We submitted the filings to the DA, who added a fraudulent conversion count to the list. Words like that have weight. You can feel them land. Dorian asked to meet for coffee. He looked 10 years older than he did 3 months ago. In the way of someone who has learned too much about the person who raised him, he slid a ring across the table, a USB key he'd found taped under a drawer in Celine's desk. On it, voice memos. Not hers. Kessler's. Recordings of post-shift dictations where he rambled to himself about aligning expectations and not letting the natural process drag, and the line that made my hands shake. She wants a narrative that reads as mercy. I recognized the tone. People always think they're confessing to a neutral room when they talk into a mic alone. They're confessing to a future audience with better information. We handed it over. Chain of custody, again. Seraphine listened with her eyes closed, not out of reverence but out of focus. Like she was watching the words assemble themselves into exhibits. You're sure you want trial? She asked me one more time, and I heard the care in it, not doubt. Yes, I said. Because we're not here to negotiate with a pattern. We're here to name it in public. She nodded once. Then we try it. On the morning of jury selection, I walked the long hallway to the courtroom with a quiet that felt earned. The families gathered in 2s and 3s, holding hands, clutching notebooks, or just clutching their own elbows like the body knows it needs a hug and gives itself one. Marisol was there. In her blazer and the sensible shoes nurses wear. Because function is not a failure of style. It's a declaration of purpose. Rowan stood beside me, eyes soft with the kind of pride people have when they've watched you become a truer version of yourself. We didn't exchange big words. He adjusted his tie. I smoothed the front of my jacket. Across the hall, Seraphine conferred with her team, then looked over and just for a second let the professional mask ease, enough for me to see the human under it, the woman who rehearsed her courage and then brought it to work. I thought about the verbs on my board. Answered, showed up, documented, called, filed, rested, rehearsed, planted, declined. I thought about my father's handwriting and yellow roses, and the sound of a nurse's voice. The first morning she decided fear had lost the vote. I thought about the sentences that had tried to ruin me. Pain doesn't testify. And the sentences that had saved me. Evidence will tell the story. And I thought about the hallway itself. Long, polished, echoing a place designed for movement between rooms where decisions are made. Maybe that's all justice is most days. The commitment to walk the hallway, again and again, until you reach the door that opens when you knock. The bailiff called the room to order. The first panel of jurors filed in, blinking at the brightness of a room where their lives would intersect with ours for a little while. I took a breath and felt, for the first time since the phone rang that morning months ago, that air could fill my lungs all the way to the bottom. If you've never sat through voir dire, here's the honest version. It's speed dating with consequences. Strangers in rows. Questions that sound simple until you realize the answer reveals more than you meant to say. Lawyers listening not just for what you said but how you said it. The goal isn't perfect jurors, it's fair ones. People who can look at a pile of facts without squinting them into the shape of their favorite story. I took a seat behind the rail with the other families. We'd agreed. No side eye, no sighs, no gestures that could read as coaching. We were here to hold the room together, not to sway it. Still, I watched faces the way you watch skies before a storm looking for signs. Seraphine started soft. Has anyone here had an experience with a hospital or a doctor that might make this case easier or harder for you? Hands rose like cautious flags. A retiree in a blue cardigan said her husband's chemo nurse saved his life by caring like it mattered. A younger man admitted he didn't trust hospitals after a billing nightmare. A woman in scrubs night shift, by the shadows under her eyes, said she was a CNA and could stay objective, as long as the terms are explained clear. Seraphine nodded, grateful without making it a performance. She defined standard of care in plain language. What a reasonably careful doctor would do in those circumstances. Not a perfect one, not a reckless one. She watched heads nod. The defense took their turn. Who believes doctors are often scapegoats when outcomes are bad? A few hands. Who thinks families sometimes can't accept death and want someone to blame? More hands than I liked. The lawyer smiled, a small, practiced smile, then pushed. Can you promise to decide based only on evidence, not sympathy? It's a trap question. The correct answer is yes, even though anyone honest knows sympathy doesn't turn off like a switch. It can be noticed, and then placed gently to the side. A middle-aged teacher in the front row said, I can promise to decide based on evidence. I can also promise to be human while I do it. I loved her instantly. The defense struck her. Of course they did. By day 2, the panel had thinned to a shape that looked like the city. A mechanic who quoted torque specs like scripture. A grandmother who ran a church kitchen. An IT specialist who smiled with one side of his mouth. A florist with inked vines on her forearm. A sous chef who took notes even when no one asked him to. 12 seated. Plus 2 alternates. Not perfect. Fair enough. Rowan leaned toward me. This is a jury that understands systems, he said. People who fix things and feed people and make lists. Good, I whispered. We brought them a system to understand. Openings are where the story speaks out loud for the first time, not proof promise. A map, not the miles. Seraphine stood at the lectern and breathed once, in that deliberate way that says she owns her oxygen. You will hear a lot of words in this trial, she began. Some are medical, some are legal. The most important ones are simple: decision, pattern, intent, evidence. She let each word fall, then built the image. This is a case about decisions a doctor and a proxy made, not in the heat of an emergency but over days, quietly, when no one was looking. It's about a pattern, more than one patient, more than one family. The same moves repeated. It's about intent, not what someone wished to be true about themselves, but what their actions reveal. And it is about evidence, documents, data, money trails, and the voices of people who were there. She didn't mention me by name. She didn't need to. She put up a timeline that began with a neutral fact admission date and let the arrows do the work. She told the jury what the case was not. This is not a trial about whether death exists. It is a trial about whether people with power use that inevitability to make choices the law forbids. She promised they would hear from Marisol, an audit log specialist, a medical ethics professor, and from families who recognized the same shape in their grief. Then she sat down, unhurried. The defense rose with a theater whisper. The man who adjusts his cuffs and asks the jury to be wary of narratives. He leaned into the word mercy so hard it might have snapped. He framed Kessler as a good doctor caught in the crosshairs of hindsight. He painted Celine as a devoted spouse protecting her husband from agitation, there's that word, while an estranged daughter made a difficult situation more difficult. He called Havenline a heartfelt attempt to give meaning to pain. He told the jury they would see reasonable medical judgment and no criminal intent. He asked them to keep sympathy in the gallery, not the jury box. He sat, satisfied, like someone who believes tone can carry a case farther than facts. I wrote 4 words on the pad in my lap. Maps aren't the land. Witness 1. The hospital's custodian of records. Dry? Yes. Critical? Also yes. They testified that the records were complete copies, produced under subpoena, with audit trails intact. Chain of custody, tick. The juror's eyes glazed, then sharpened when terms like user ID and timestamp hit the air. The IT specialist juror nodded like he'd found his niche, no pun intended. The word lived in my vocabulary from another life but felt right here too. The way people have niches and patterns have them too. Witness 2. Marisol. She sat straighter than the chair wanted her to. Seraphine approached like you walk up to a friend carrying something fragile. Please tell the jury your role, Seraphine said. I'm a registered nurse. I worked in the ICU. I cared for Mr. She said my father's name, and I felt my throat do that involuntary thing it does when the room says his name and he isn't in it. She told the truth in verbs. I observed. I charted. I escalated concerns. I was reassigned. Her cadence was simple. A rhythm you could trust. She described the dosage increases, the proxy notes that appeared shortly before and after, the moment she said, this doesn't fit the standard of care, and was told it was above my pay grade. She didn't editorialize. She didn't cry. In the jurors' faces, I watched respect accumulate like a balance sheet. The defense tried to shrink her. You don't have an MD. No, she said. I have a license and eyes. You dislike Dr. Kessler. I dislike decisions that harm patients. You were written up for insubordination. I was documented for escalating patient safety concerns. Is that a yes? Resin verification. And made another hair down when in the warring. Yes, she said. And then added, because plain truth is a good light. And if I had to do it again, I would. The teacher the defense had struck would have smiled at that. I did, inside. Witness 3. The audit log specialist from the hospital vendor. A man who looked like he loved spreadsheets unironically. He explained how the system stamps edits. Who can change what? What's logged, even if you delete it. He laid out a chart. Date divided by time. User. Action. Location. He traced 214A. M dosage bump 220. Proxy note. 223. Nurse concern. 229. Override. He didn't accuse, he showed. The jurors leaned in together. The slow choreography of people you can watch learning in real time. Cross-tried sophistication. But metadata can be misleading, can't it? The specialist smiled the way people smile when someone mispronounces their field. Metadata can be misunderstood. That's different. He walked through server time sinks and access tokens and workstation IPs until the lawyer backed off. Hands up. Witness 4. Inez, with her notebook. She told the story of the care home, the patient who was fine until he wasn't. The keys to the narcotics cabinet signed out by people who shouldn't have had them. The defense went for credibility. You're not a nurse. I am not, she said. But I count. And I remember. She held up the notebook, not dramatic, just steady. Somebody has to keep count when counting matters. I almost mouthed the line with her. By lunch, the air had thickened with evidence, the kind that doesn't need me to narrate it because it started speaking for itself. In the afternoon, the defense called a palliative care expert, whose resume read like a brochure. She talked about comfort, about suffering, about how mercy can be misread by outsiders. She used the phrase, good death, and watched it land like a feather she hoped would be a blanket. Seraphine was gentle on cross. Doctor, can comfort care include opioids? Yes. Can comfort care include excluding a patient's daughter, if visits cause agitation? Is there an objective measure of agitation? We use clinical judgment. Would clinical judgment include a nurse's repeated concerns? A beat. It should. The word sat there between them like a chair suddenly occupied. Then came Dr. Kessler. Not as a defense expert, but as a defendant called in the state's case. That meant narrower questions, tighter ropes. He wore a charcoal suit, and the defensiveness of a man who isn't used to answering to anyone. He said, in my experience and with respect and clinically appropriate enough times I started counting in my head to keep from standing up. Seraphine didn't dance. Doctor, on date. Did you increase the morphine from X to Y? Yes. Was the patient's respiration rate noted as number before the increase? Yes. Is number within normal range? It can be. Context depending. Did a nurse raise a concern at 223? Yes. Did you override it? Yes. Did you document the reason? I believed my judgment was sound. That isn't documentation, doctor. Did you write a reason? He shifted. Not in those words. What words then? Silence in court isn't silent, it's compressed. He finally said, I wrote that the patient appeared uncomfortable. And you measured that how? Clinical experience. She pivoted. Is it your voice on this recording? She played a snippet of a voice memo his own. She wants a narrative that reads as mercy. His jaw tightened. It sounds like me. Deja vu. Different witness, same dodge. And by she, you meant miss? My communications with families are private. She didn't blush. She changed verbs. Doctor, did you receive money from Havenline? My LLC was paid for consulting. Consulting on what? Palliative care philosophy. And the consulting involved what exactly? Another silence. This one prickly. Workshops. Program frameworks, he said, grasping at words like they might form a life raft. Any of those frameworks advise increasing morphine contrary to physician orders? No. It's important to Maisie. Any advise restricting daughters? No. Any advise recording memos about narratives? I don't recall. Would the records refresh your recollection? He hesitated. Perhaps. She handed him a binder. He flipped, found nothing that rescued him, and handed it back with a politeness that felt like defeat. Celine didn't take the stand that first day. Her lawyer signaled he'd save her for their case in chief, likely after they tried to blunt some of the blows. Instead, we heard from the bank investigator about the Larkspur Family Trust, and transfers to Havenline. The word self-dealing entered the transcript. The jurors' pens moved. When the judge broke for the day, the corridor buzzed like a beehive someone had gently set down. Reporters hovered. I stuck to the line we'd practiced. We trust the process. Evidence will tell the story. It felt less like a line now, more like a truth I could lean on. I walked home under a sky the color of steel. In my kitchen, I watered the yellow roses that had outgrown their first pots, and were stubbornly blooming. I thought about growth, how it sneaks up on you. One day you're the person who apologizes when someone bumps you. The next you're the person who can sit in a courtroom and let the truth stand on its own legs without rushing to hold it up. I called Ara. How's your nervous system? She asked, which is her way of avoiding the word heart when mine is already full. Humming, I said. But steady. She promised to bring over soup the next night. She always brings soup when the world is trying to eat me alive. Rituals matter. I sat at the table and looked at my whiteboard of verbs. I added new ones from the day. Seated, swore, listened, admitted, connected, underlined, connected, because that's what a jury is. In the end, 12 strangers connected by a civic duty and a story they didn't ask for, but now have to carry carefully to a conclusion that fits. Before bed, I read another page of my father's journal, the one where he wrote in jagged script about feeling fuzzy after she visits, and then apologized to me in the same paragraph for not being brave enough to make it stop. I pressed my palm to the page like I could warm the ink. We're making it stop, I said out loud to the empty apartment that didn't feel empty at all. Day 2 of testimony began with a medical ethics professor who explained in plain English what proxy power is supposed to be. A bridge, not a gate. A proxy interprets known wishes, she said. They don't invent them. They don't benefit from them. She drew a bright line between comfort and convenience. Comfort is for the patient. Convenience is for everyone else. The florist juror blinked hard at that. Like she'd felt it land. On cross, the defense tried to paint gray where the professor had drawn white lines. She didn't flinch. Ethics doesn't prevent every abuse, she said. It does give you a vocabulary to name one when you see it. She stepped down and the room felt taller, like someone had raised the ceiling for a minute. Then the state called Dorian. He looked like a man building a new spine inside his old shirt. He didn't perform remorse, he answered questions. He described the nonprofit's setup, stipends, board votes that felt like foregone conclusions, conversations about nurses as problems. He said the sentence I'd read in his text. I don't want this. He said it in a courtroom voice, the kind that knows a transcript takes you literally. The defense tried to rattle him with loyalty questions. He answered with facts, not feelings. It's hard to cross-examine a noun. By mid-afternoon, the judge called a break, and the lawyers shuffled paper. I wandered to the window at the end of the hall and watched the city carrying on buses beside school kids. A courier with a box. An old couple negotiating a curb like it might argue back. I breathed. I rehearsed my courage silently, the way Seraphine taught by example. Repetition, not bravado. When court resumed, the state played the grocery store audio. My voice in the wind, hers close too close, saying the phrases that still make my skin remember. The jurors went still, a flock deciding to listen for predators. The defense objected half-heartedly and was overruled. The audio ended. The judge wrote something in the margin of his notes that I will never know but will always imagine. was an exhale shaped like a word. We rested the day on that sound, not sight. Verbs, not adjectives. The room emptied in waves. Outside, a reporter asked what justice would look like to me. I wanted to say complicated things about systems and restitution and policy change. I said, justice looks like a pattern getting a name and then losing its power. He wrote it down, eyebrows up. I don't know if it will make the edit. It made mine. At home, I opened a clean notebook. The old one was full pages of dates and quotes and tiny arrows like footpaths. I wrote on the first page, Day 1, the story spoke out loud. Underneath, in smaller letters, remember to rest. I texted Marisol. You were brave and clear. She replied with a picture of her kids doing homework at the kitchen table and the caption, we're almost there. I don't know if almost is true. I know it's necessary. Sleep came like a visitor who finally trusts your house. In the morning, I would put on the same jacket and carry the same pen, and sit in the same bench, and watch as more words became evidence. I would water the roses before I left. I would lock the door and hear my father's voice in my head. Good. You didn't let her win. And we would keep going through cross-examination, and forensic accountants, and the defense's attempt to paint shadows as light. Through juror questions and judicial rulings and the steady, unglamorous march of a system doing what it's supposed to do when people insist on it. Because that's the truth underneath all the paper cuts and open wounds. Justice doesn't arrive like a hero. It accumulates like proof. Quiet. Patient. Relentless. Trials feel like relays. One side runs, the other studies their stride. The defense took its lap in crisp suits and softer words. Mercy, context, judgment, and tried to turn fog into shelter. Seraphine answered with clocks and verbs. Requested, increased, overrode, excluded. Paper didn't flinch. By week's end, the room had what it needed. Timelines that didn't wobble, audit logs that didn't blink, money trails that told time, and voices. Nurse, son, an accountant that refused to dress harm in pretty language. Kessler hid inside. Clinical judgment. Celine wore intention like perfume. The jury watched. Pens moving. Systems people doing what systems people do. Connect. We left the courthouse without speeches. I watered the yellow roses in bigger pots, the way you tend something that's learned to take root. On the whiteboard I wrote 5 verbs and underlined them twice. Opened, asked, counted, planted, rested. Rest matters when justice is patient. Whatever the verdict becomes, evidence will tell that story. Mine ends here. With a circle of families who know they're not alone. A nurse who wouldn't be quiet. An attorney who fell in love with paperwork on purpose. A prosecutor who rehearsed her courage, and a city that learned a sentence it can say out loud. A proxy is a bridge, not a gate. Comfort is for the patient. Convenience is not care. I'll keep the index card in my pocket and the roses by the bus stop. Doors open easier now. That's enough for an ending.